In the dead of night, on a fog-shrouded airfield somewhere in occupied France, a lone figure moved through the shadows between rows of parked Allied bombers. He wore a Luftwaffe flight suit beneath a stolen British officer's coat, his German accent practiced into something resembling Oxford English. His mission was audacious beyond reason: to steal an American B-17 flying fortress and fly it back to Germany, right under the noses of Allied security. This wasn't fiction. This was Kampfgeschwader 200. While most aviation enthusiasts know about dogfights, bombing raids, and the great aces of World War II, few have heard of the Luftwaffe's most secret unit, a squadron that didn't just shoot down enemy aircraft, but stole them. These weren't ordinary pilots. They were intelligence operatives, master thieves of the sky, trained to infiltrate enemy airfields, commandeer Allied planes, and vanish into the night before anyone realized what had happened. What began as a desperate German intelligence operation became one of the war's most bizarre and daring campaigns. Captured bombers flying in Allied formations. Spies dropped behind enemy lines from stolen American aircraft. Entire squadrons of ghost planes operating in plain sight. This is the untold story of aviation's greatest heists, and the pilots who pulled them off. By 1943, the Luftwaffe was losing the war in the skies over Europe, and Germany's military leadership knew it. The relentless Allied bombing campaigns were decimating German cities and industrial capacity. American B-17s and B-24s flew in massive formations protected by long-range fighters, making conventional interception increasingly costly and ineffective. British Lancasters pounded targets by night with growing precision. The Luftwaffe needed answers, and traditional combat wasn't providing them. In the autumn of 1943, the German High Command authorized the creation of a new kind of unit. Officially designated Kampfgeschwader 200, or KG 200, this squadron would operate under levels of secrecy that rivaled the Enigma program itself. Its personnel files were classified above top secret. Its airfields were hidden. Even other Luftwaffe units were forbidden from asking questions about its operations. KG 200's mission was unlike anything attempted before in aerial warfare. The unit would specialize in clandestine operations, long-range reconnaissance deep behind enemy lines, insertion and extraction of German agents, testing of captured Allied aircraft, and, most audaciously, the theft and operational use of enemy planes for intelligence gathering and deception operations. The pilots selected for KG 200 represented the Luftwaffe's absolute elite. They weren't chosen merely for their flying skills, though all possessed thousands of combat hours. They needed linguistic ability to understand Allied radio communications and control tower instructions. They required technical expertise to operate unfamiliar aircraft systems under extreme pressure. Most critically, they needed nerves of steel and the improvisational genius of master criminals. Commander Werner Baumbach, a decorated bomber pilot and recipient of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, led the unit. Baumbach understood that KG 200's success depended on absolute operational security and the selection of pilots with both exceptional skill and unwavering discretion. Those who joined KG 200 disappeared from normal Luftwaffe records. If captured, they faced certain execution as spies rather than treatment as prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. The unit's headquarters was established at Berlin-Tempelhof, with operational bases scattered across occupied Europe in locations so secret that even supply personnel operated under cover stories. Maintenance crews worked in camouflaged hangars, often unaware of the true nature of the aircraft they serviced. By early 1944, as the Allied invasion of Europe loomed, KG-200 had become fully operational. Its complement included not just German aircraft, but an astonishing collection of captured Allied planes. American B-17 Flying Fortresses, B-24 Liberators, P-51 Mustangs, British Spitfires, Lancasters, and Mosquitoes. Soviet aircraft filled another hangar. Each had been meticulously restored, studied and prepared for operational use. The technical intelligence alone proved invaluable. German engineers examined every captured system, seeking weaknesses and tactical advantages. But KG-200's true purpose went far beyond study. These aircraft would fly again, wearing their original markings, carrying their original identification codes, operating in Allied airspace as wolves in sheep's clothing. The very success of Allied air operations in 1944 created unexpected vulnerabilities. By mid-1944, the Allies controlled vast numbers of airfields across southern England, liberated France, and southern Italy. Hundreds of bombers and fighters landed and took off daily in a carefully choreographed ballet of aerial logistics. The sheer scale of operations, with thousands of aircraft moving between bases, undergoing maintenance, and awaiting crew assignments, created chaos that German intelligence operatives learned to exploit. Security protocols at Allied airfields varied wildly in quality and enforcement. In England, where German infiltration seemed unlikely, some bases maintained relatively lax perimeter security. Guards checked identification, but the constant flow of personnel, support staff, mechanics, and visiting crews from other squadrons made perfect security impossible. A confident officer with the right uniform and paperwork could access almost any area. The situation in newly liberated France proved even more chaotic. Advanced airfields, established behind the rapidly moving front lines, often consisted of little more than hastily repaired runways, temporary hangars made from salvaged materials, and minimal security infrastructure. Damaged aircraft awaiting repair sat in open fields, sometimes guarded by a single bored private who might not question a maintenance crew arriving in the pre-dawn darkness. Aircraft themselves often contained their own vulnerabilities. Bombers returning from missions frequently suffered battle damage requiring extensive repair. These damaged planes would be parked in maintenance areas, sometimes for days or weeks, while spare parts arrived and overworked mechanics prioritized more urgent repairs. A bomber with one engine torn apart and holes in its fuselage attracted little attention, until someone realized the bomber had been systematically repaired by unknown hands. Communication lapses created additional opportunities. In the fog of war, with hundreds of planes moving between bases daily, tracking individual aircraft proved challenging. A bomber diverted to an alternate field due to damage might not be immediately missed at its home base. Transfer orders could be forged. Radio communications could be mimicked. In the crucial hours between discovery and alarm, a stolen aircraft could cross hundreds of miles. The Allied practice of painting clear identification markings on aircraft, while essential for preventing friendly fire, also aided German deception operations. Every B-17 bore its group markings, squadron letters, and individual aircraft number in bright colors, visible from great distances. These markings announced to any observer, "I belong here. I am one of yours." German intelligence methodically documented these patterns. KG-200 operatives studied aerial photographs of Allied airfields, noting the locations of maintenance areas, guard posts, and fuel depots. They compiled directories of squadron markings, radio call signs, and operational procedures. They identified which bases had the weakest security, which types of aircraft were most likely to be left unguarded, and which times of day offered the best opportunities for infiltration. Perhaps most critically, the Allies initially failed to conceive that anyone would attempt such operations. The idea of German pilots infiltrating secured airfields to steal multi-ton bombers seemed absurdly improbable. This psychological blind spot, the assumption that certain actions were simply too audacious to be real, provided KG-200's greatest advantage. By the summer of 1944, the stage was set for one of the war's most bizarre campaigns. The first confirmed KG-200 aircraft theft operation occurred in July 1944, though accounts differ on specific details, a testament to the operation's success in remaining secret. According to veteran accounts compiled after the war, the target was a B-17G Flying Fortress that had made an emergency landing at a small advanced airfield in Normandy on July 18, 1944. The bomber, designated Patches by its crew, had sustained flak damage over Caen, but managed to limp back across the channel before its pilot judged further flight too risky. The crew walked away uninjured, and the bomber was assessed as requiring several days of engine work before returning to England. The aircraft sat in a maintenance area approximately 200 yards from the field's makeshift control tower, guarded intermittently by personnel whose primary concern was preventing locals from stripping souvenirs rather than preventing theft of a four-engine bomber. What happened over the next 3 nights remains partially obscured by wartime secrecy and conflicting testimony, but the essential facts appear sound. A 4-man KG-200 team, led by an experienced bomber pilot named Hauptmann Klaus Hahn, infiltrated the area on the night of July 20th. They arrived in a captured American Jeep, wearing a mixture of American and British uniforms that would pass casual inspection in darkness. According to post-war interrogations, Hahn carried forged transfer orders stamped with an authentic Allied command seal obtained through intelligence channels. The team approached the guard post near midnight. One member, speaking perfect American English with a New York accent, explained that they were ferry crew sent to fly the B-17 to a repair depot in England at first light. The guard, a 19-year-old private who had been on duty for 12 hours, barely glanced at the paperwork. Over the next 3 hours, the KG-200 team methodically prepared the aircraft. They had studied B-17 systems extensively and knew exactly which repairs the bomber needed. Working by flashlight, they replaced damaged hydraulic lines with parts brought in their Jeep, patched several holes in the fuselage with aluminum sheets, and serviced the problematic No. 3 engine. According to Hahn's later account, given during British interrogation after his capture in 1945, the hardest part was maintaining casual demeanor while performing repairs that would have impressed the bomber's regular ground crew. At approximately 3:45 a.m. on July 21st, as dawn approached, the team climbed aboard. Hahn settled into the pilot's seat, running through pre-flight checks with the smooth confidence of his 1,000 hours in captured Allied aircraft. His co-pilot, a former Luftwaffe instructor named Lieutenant Werner Müller, handled the unfamiliar American instruments. The engines coughed to live one by one, their familiar American roar echoing across the sleeping field. No alarm sounded. No one questioned why a bomber was starting up in the pre-dawn darkness. Such movements occurred constantly as aircraft prepared for early morning missions. Han teed toward the runway, his movements deliberate and unhurried. As they rolled past the control tower, a sleepy radio operator's voice crackled over the radio. "Unknown B-17, state your intentions." Mueller keyed the microphone, his English flawless. "Tower, this is ferry crew for patches, proceeding to Bovingdon as ordered. Good morning." A pause, then, "Roger patches, cleared for departure. Have a safe flight." The stolen bomber lifted into the gray dawn sky at 4:12 a.m., climbing steadily eastward. To any observer, it was simply another Allied aircraft heading home across the channel. Except it was heading the wrong direction. Han kept the aircraft low, skimming just above the morning fog that blanketed the French countryside. He avoided known Allied flight corridors and maintained radio silence after clearing the airfield. Approximately 90 minutes later, the B-17 touched down at a concealed Luftwaffe base in western Germany, where technical specialists and intelligence officers waited eagerly. The Americans didn't realize Patches was missing until the afternoon of July 21st, nearly 12 hours after it vanished. The theft of already captured Allied aircraft presented different challenges than airfield infiltration, ones that demanded even greater technical expertise and improvisation. When Allied bombers sustained heavy damage over Germany, crews sometimes had no choice but to crash land or bail out over enemy territory. These aircraft became immediate prizes for Luftwaffe recovery teams, but most were too damaged for conventional study. Tail sections torn away, wings shredded by flak, engines smoking ruins. These weren't aircraft. They were wreckage, except to KG-200, which saw potential. Throughout 1944, specialized recovery teams attached to KG-200 scoured crash sites across occupied territory, searching for aircraft that might be salvaged. Their criteria were surprisingly optimistic. If the fuselage remained intact and at least 2 engines showed potential for repair, the bomber became a candidate for recovery. One remarkable case, documented through Wehrmacht logistics records, involved a B-24 Liberator that belly-landed in a Belgian field in September 1944. The bomber, pursued by German fighters after a raid on Dusseldorf, had lost 2 engines and most of its hydraulic system before its pilot executed a controlled crash landing. The crew evacuated and disappeared into the countryside, aided by resistance fighters. The aircraft remained relatively intact, but thoroughly immobile. A KG-200 technical team arrived within 12 hours, working under concealment tarps and moving only at night to avoid Allied reconnaissance flights. They spent 6 days performing field repairs that would have challenged a fully equipped maintenance depot. They cannibalized parts from other wrecks, fabricated replacement hydraulic lines from captured supplies, and somehow coaxed 2 of the 4 engines back to operational status. The real challenge wasn't mechanical, it was the runway. The bomber sat in a pasture barely 400 yards long, bordered by trees and a stone wall. Under normal circumstances, a fully loaded B-24 needed over a mile to take off. This aircraft would have to lift off in less than a quarter of that distance, with 2 engines, and carrying significantly less fuel to reduce weight. According to the pilot's account, Oberleutnant Hans Joachim Reschke, interrogated by American forces in 1946, the takeoff attempt occurred on the night of September 24th. Local Wehrmacht units cleared livestock from the field and positioned trucks with headlights to mark the makeshift runway. Reshka calculated he would have approximately 3 seconds between reaching flying speed and hitting the trees. There would be no second attempt. The Liberator's 2 functioning engines howled at full throttle as Reshke released the brakes at 11:20 p.m. The bomber lurched forward, accelerating agonizingly slowly, on 2 engines and damaged landing gear. Reshka held the nose down until the last possible moment, trading altitude for speed. The trees rushed toward them in the darkness. At precisely the moment the main gear should have collapsed under stress, Reshke hauled back on the yoke. The B-24 staggered into the air, clearing the tree line with approximately 10 feet to spare. The assembled Wehrmacht troops below erupted in celebration, quickly silenced by officers who remembered they were still behind enemy lines. Reshke flew the crippled bomber on a winding route through the darkness, avoiding known Allied positions and keeping altitude below 2,000 feet. The aircraft's damaged controls fought him constantly. Navigation instruments were smashed. He flew by compass, moonlight, and dead reckoning, knowing that any Allied or German fighter that spotted them would likely shoot first and identify later. The Liberator touched down at a Luftwaffe field near Frankfurt just before dawn, after 3 hours of white-knuckle flying. Reshke reportedly needed assistance climbing from the cockpit, his hands cramping from the constant battle with damaged controls. Similar operations occurred throughout late 1944. A P-51 Mustang recovered from a crash site near Arnhem and flown out using a repaired canal bank as a runway. A Lancaster bomber pulled from a Dutch field using oxen and a commandeered railroad locomotive, then restored to flight status. Each operation represented extraordinary technical achievement under impossible circumstances, and each added another Allied aircraft to KG-200's covert fleet. The psychological aspect proved equally challenging. These pilots flew unfamiliar aircraft with unfamiliar damage, knowing they might encounter Allied fighters who would show no mercy to what appeared to be a damaged bomber attempting to return home. They also risked being shot down by their own flak batteries, which had no way to distinguish a captured Allied bomber from a genuine enemy aircraft. Perhaps most remarkably, these operations remained almost entirely unknown to the Allies until after the war. Recovery teams worked quickly and vanished before Allied forces could investigate. By the time wreckage sites were examined, the most valuable aircraft had already disappeared. The stolen aircraft weren't museum pieces. KG-200 put them to immediate operational use in some of the war's most sensitive intelligence operations. Flying captured Allied bombers provided Germany with unprecedented access to enemy airspace. A B-17 wearing proper markings and flying in standard formations attracted no suspicion from Allied fighters or ground observers. Radio chatter in perfect English further sold the deception. These aircraft became flying spy platforms, gathering intelligence that conventional reconnaissance could never obtain. One documented operation involved photographing Allied port facilities in southern England during August 1944. The mission, flown by a captured B-17, inserted itself into a returning bomber stream after a raid on Germany. The aircraft maintained proper formation spacing and responded appropriately to radio calls, while its navigator systematically photographed Portsmouth and Southampton harbors using concealed cameras. The bomber's German crew observed ship movements, dock activities, and supply depots in broad daylight, from optimal altitude, without a single Allied fighter giving them a second glance. The photographs revealed embarkation preparations that helped German intelligence Assess the timing and scale of operations in southern France. The B-17 returned to Germany 8 hours later, having flown over 600 miles through Allied-controlled airspace without incident. According to veteran accounts, which cannot be fully verified, another mission in October 1944 involved dropping German agents behind Allied lines in France. A captured B-24 Liberator, complete with authentic damage from a recent raid, limped toward Allied territory as though crippled. It flew low over a designated drop zone near Lyon, disgorged 3 intelligence operatives by parachute, then continued westward before turning back in darkness. The agents carried forged papers identifying them as French resistance fighters. They wore civilian clothing and brought radios disguised as farm equipment. Their mission? Observe Allied supply movements, identify headquarters locations, and report on troop concentrations. 2 of the 3 were captured within a week, but the third operated for nearly 2 months before British intelligence identified and arrested him. KG-200 also conducted technical reconnaissance missions that pushed the boundaries of aviation audacity. One operation, described in post-war Luftwaffe records, tasked a captured Mosquito with photographing the damage from V-2 rocket strikes in London. The fast British reconnaissance aircraft flew at high altitude over the English capital in November 1944, its presence so routine that no one questioned it. The photographs helped German rocket scientists refine targeting calculations. The most sensitive operations involved agent insertion into Britain itself. While records remain fragmentary, many KG-200 files were destroyed as Germany collapsed in 1945. Evidence suggests at least 3 attempts to land German agents in Britain using captured Allied aircraft. One mission in December 1944 nearly succeeded. A captured B-17, painted in the colors of an American bomb group and carrying authentic markings, filed a flight plan from a fictitious French base to a legitimate American air base in southern England. The bomber claimed engine trouble and requested emergency landing permission. British controllers, hearing flawless American accents and proper radio procedures, granted approval. The B-17 touched down at 2:30 p.m. on December 12th. Ground crew rushed to assist the apparently damaged bomber, which taxied to a remote dispersal area, claiming hydraulic failures. 2 men in American uniforms disembarked, carrying toolkits and walking casually toward the base perimeter. What went wrong remains unclear from available records. Possibly someone noticed inconsistencies in the aircraft's markings. Possibly a ground crewman recognized that the damage looked staged. Or possibly British intelligence, which had penetrated German intelligence networks through the double-cross system, had advance warning. Security personnel arrested the 2 men within minutes. The B-17's crew, realizing the operation had been compromised, attempted to take off immediately. They got airborne, but were intercepted by Spitfires 20 miles from the coast. The bomber was shot down over the channel. No survivors were recovered. Despite failures, the psychological impact of these operations extended far beyond their direct intelligence value. The knowledge that Allied aircraft might actually be German penetration aircraft created paranoia and forced resource-intensive security measures. Every returning damaged bomber required verification. Every unexpected aircraft landing raised suspicions. KG-200 had turned the Allies' own aircraft into sources of doubt and fear. Not every KG-200 operation succeeded, and the failures often proved as dramatic as the successes. In October 1944, A KG-200 team attempted to steal a B-24 Liberator from an American air base in Italy. The infiltration proceeded flawlessly. The team accessed the flight line using forged orders, located a bomber undergoing maintenance, and began preparing it for theft. They worked through the night of October 17th, making repairs by flashlight while American personnel slept less than 100 yards away. At approximately 4:15 a.m., as the team prepared to start engines, an American military policeman on routine patrol noticed suspicious activity around the aircraft. According to his later report, something about the maintenance crew struck him as odd. Perhaps their movements, perhaps an overheard comment in German, perhaps simply a soldier's instinct that something was wrong. He approached to investigate. The KG-200 team, recognizing the danger, made a desperate decision. They started all 4 engines simultaneously, a procedure that would immediately alert everyone on the base that something unusual was happening. The bomber began moving before the startled MP could react. What followed was chaos. The B-24 taxied rapidly toward the runway while klaxons sounded across the base. American personnel, still processing what was happening, scrambled to respond. A vehicle attempted to block the runway, but arrived too late. The bomber accelerated down the strip as machine gun fire from guard towers traced lines across the darkness. The Liberator lifted off at 4:28 a.m. with several soldiers still firing at it. Damage to the tail section suggested at least one round penetrated the fuselage. But the American base commander faced an impossible decision. Should he scramble fighters to shoot down what appeared to be a stolen American bomber, or risk letting it escape? Confusion provided crucial minutes. By the time fighters launched, the B-24 had vanished into the pre-dawn darkness over the Adriatic Sea. It never reached Germany. Whether it crashed, ran out of fuel, or was shot down by German flak remains unknown. No wreckage was ever definitively identified. Another close call occurred in France during November 1944, as Allied forces advanced across the country. A KG-200 pilot named Lieutenant Friedrich Koch flew a captured P-51 Mustang on a reconnaissance mission over American lines. His plan was simple: join up with a formation of genuine American fighters returning from a bomber escort mission, observe and photograph Allied positions, then slip away in the confusion. Koch successfully inserted himself into a squadron of P-51s near Metz. He maintained proper formation spacing and even acknowledged radio calls with appropriate responses. For nearly 20 minutes, he flew as part of an American fighter squadron, undetected. Then his luck ran out. An experienced American pilot noticed something subtly wrong with Koch's flying. Perhaps his formation positioning was slightly off. Perhaps his movements seemed too deliberate, too careful. The American pulled alongside for a visual inspection. According to Koch's account, given during interrogation after his capture, he saw the American pilot's expression change from casual interest to sudden alarm. The American recognized that something was wrong, though whether he identified Koch as German is unclear from the record. Koch broke formation immediately, diving away at full throttle. Several American P-51s pursued, but the captured Mustang performed identically to their own aircraft. A high-speed chase developed over the French countryside, with Koch desperately trying to reach German-controlled territory just 20 miles away. He almost made it. Approximately 5 miles from German lines, anti-aircraft fire from American positions hit his aircraft. The P-51's engine exploded. Koch bailed out at low altitude, and was captured minutes after landing by American infantry. His interrogators reportedly found his story almost impossible to believe, until they examined his Luftwaffe identification and specialized KG-200 papers. Weather also claimed KG-200 operations. In January 1945, a captured Lancaster bomber attempting to reach Germany from France encountered severe winter weather. The pilot, unfamiliar with the Lancaster's de-icing systems, struggled as ice accumulated on the wings and control surfaces. Radio intercepts, declassified decades later, captured brief, desperate transmissions in German before the aircraft vanished from radar. The crash site was discovered in March 1945 by advancing Allied forces. All crew members had died in the impact. Perhaps the most poignant failure involved a B-17 theft attempt that never got off the ground. A KG-200 team infiltrated an English airfield in February 1945, reaching a parked bomber without detection. But as they conducted pre-flight checks, one crew member discovered that the aircraft's fuel tanks were nearly empty, left that way intentionally as a new security measure to prevent theft. With no way to refuel without attracting attention and dawn approaching rapidly, the team had no choice but to abandon the operation. They slipped away from the airfield, destroyed their forged documents, and attempted to reach neutral territory. 2 were captured, crossing into Switzerland. The others disappeared into the chaos of war's final months. These failures underscored the razor-thin margins on which KG-200 operated, and the courage required to attempt operations where discovery meant certain execution. The largest and most ambitious KG-200 operation occurred in late October 1944, an attempt to steal multiple bombers in a single coordinated action across several Allied airfields. The mission, codenamed Unternehmen Falk, Operation Falcon, represented nearly a year of planning by KG-200 Command. Intelligence gathered from reconnaissance flights, resistance networks, and interrogations of captured Allied airmen had identified 4 separate airfields in France and Belgium, where security lapses and maintenance backlogs created opportunities. The plan called for simultaneous theft operations on the night of October 24, 1944, with all stolen aircraft converging on a single Luftwaffe base in western Germany by dawn. If successful, Operation Falcon would deliver 4 heavy bombers, 2 B-17s, and 2 B-24s in a single night. More significantly, the psychological impact of multiple simultaneous thefts would severely damage Allied morale and force extensive security overhauls that would drain resources and complicate operations. 4 KG-200 teams deployed to their target areas in mid-October, each operating independently with no contact between teams. This cell structure meant that if one team was captured, they couldn't compromise the others. Each team consisted of 4 to 6 men. A pilot, with extensive experience in the target aircraft type, a co-pilot or navigator, and several operatives trained in aircraft maintenance and combat. The first target was a B-17G at an American forward airfield near Reims. The bomber, nicknamed Liberty Bell, had sustained damage to its tail section during a mission over Germany and sat awaiting parts. The KG-200 team, led by Hauptmann Walter Schreiber, infiltrated the field on the afternoon of October 24th, using a captured American truck and forged requisition orders for spare parts. Schreiber's background made him ideal for the mission. Before the war, he had worked for Lufthansa and spoke English with a slight British accent from training flights to London. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Ernst Fischer, had flown B-17s for nearly 6 months after being trained on a captured bomber at a secret KG-200 facility in Bavaria. They approached the bomber at approximately 8:30 p.m. as October darkness settled over the field. Schreiber chatted casually with an American guard, discussing baseball, a sport he'd studied specifically for infiltration operations. The guard, bored and cold, appreciated the company and raised no alarm when Schreiber's team began working on the aircraft. Over the next 4 hours, the team systematically prepared Liberty Bell for flight. They installed tail section parts brought in their truck, authentic American components salvaged from other wrecks, and performed maintenance that would pass casual inspection. At 12:45 a.m. on October 25th, they started the engines. The second target was more challenging, a B-24 Liberator at a British-controlled field in Belgium. This aircraft, part of a heavy conversion unit, sat in a maintenance area among dozens of other bombers in various states of repair. The KG-200 team, led by Oberleutnant Klaus Dieter, faced the additional challenge of navigating British rather than American procedures. Dieter's operation nearly failed before it began. British military police at the field entrance questioned his identification papers more thoroughly than expected. Only Dieter's perfect Oxford English, he had studied at Cambridge before the war, saved the situation. He explained his team was performing urgent repairs on priority authority from Bomber Command. The MPs, uncertain and unwilling to delay potentially important work, allowed them through. The third and fourth teams targeted B-17s at separate American fields in France. These operations proceeded similarly to the first. Infiltration under cover of maintenance orders, hours of careful preparation, and engine start in the pre-dawn darkness. At approximately 1:15 a.m., all 4 teams were in position with their stolen aircraft. The plan called for coordinated takeoff at 1:30 a.m., timing chosen to minimize the window during which one successful theft might alert the others' target bases. Liberty Bell lifted off at 1:32 a.m. Schreiber's smooth takeoff attracted no immediate suspicion. Aircraft movements during night hours occurred regularly. The B-17 climbed into the darkness and turned east, toward Germany. The second B-17, at a field near Nancy, began its takeoff roll at 1:33 a.m. This operation went flawlessly, the bomber disappearing into the night before anyone questioned its departure. The B-24 in Belgium encountered problems. As Dieter attempted to start engines, the number 3 engine refused to turn over. Precious minutes evaporated as his mechanic worked frantically to diagnose the issue. At 1:48 a.m., 18 minutes behind schedule, the Liberator's engines roared to life. But the delay proved fatal. An alert British flight controller, noting an unscheduled departure, questioned the aircraft's intentions. Dieter's attempt to bluff his way through the challenge failed. Security personnel descended on the bomber before it continued to the runway. Dieter and his team scattered into the darkness. 2 were captured. The others escaped. The fourth team's attempt ended even more dramatically. As their B-17 began taxiing at 1:35 a.m., an American officer realized something was wrong. He drove his Jeep directly into the bomber's path, forcing it to stop. The KG-200 crew, rather than surrender, attempted to shoot their way out. A brief firefight erupted on the taxiway. The pilot was killed. The others were captured. Despite two failures, two B-17s remained airborne, racing toward Germany through the pre-dawn darkness. Both aircraft flew low-level routes, navigating by moonlight and compass. Schreiber and Liberty Bell made radio contact with his second B-17 at approximately 2:20 a.m., confirming both aircraft were safely away from Allied territory. At 3:45 a.m., Allied command realized what had happened. Alerts went out across the entire European theater. Multiple aircraft stolen, presumed heading for Germany. Fighters scrambled, though finding two specific bombers in the darkness over occupied France proved nearly impossible. Liberty Bell touched down at a concealed Luftwaffe base near Frankfurt at 5:12 a.m., just as dawn broke across Germany. Schreiber's hands shook with adrenaline and exhaustion as he shut down the engines. Ground crew and intelligence officers swarmed the aircraft, examining every detail. The second B-17 never arrived. Whether it was shot down, crashed due to navigation errors, or suffered mechanical failure remains unknown. No wreckage was definitively identified, and no crew members were ever found. Operation Falcon delivered only one bomber, but that single success proved the viability of coordinated multi-target operations. Liberty Bell would serve KG-200 for 5 months before being destroyed by Allied bombing in March 1945. Intelligence gathered from the bomber's systems and equipment proved valuable to German aircraft designers. More significantly, the operation forced the Allies to acknowledge they faced a sophisticated threat. Security protocols at airfields across Europe were completely overhauled in the following weeks, requiring unprecedented resources and manpower. The Allied High Command's initial response to reports of stolen aircraft was skepticism bordering on disbelief. When the first documented theft occurred in July 1944, investigators initially suspected desertion or unauthorized joyriding by crew members rather than enemy action. The idea that Luftwaffe pilots could infiltrate secured Allied airfields, steal multi-ton bombers, and fly them back to Germany seemed absurd, the plot of a cheap spy novel rather than actual military intelligence. This changed after Operation Falcon. The near-simultaneous theft attempts at multiple locations, combined with the successful escape of Liberty Bell, forced Allied intelligence to acknowledge they faced an organized, sophisticated operation. The question became, how extensive was this threat, and how should they respond? Investigation revealed disturbing gaps in security. A review of missing aircraft records from mid-1944 onward identified at least 7 bombers whose disappearance could not be satisfactorily explained by combat loss, mechanical failure, or navigation error. Some had simply vanished from maintenance areas. Others had been declared lost over Germany, but never confirmed through wreckage or crew accounts. The working assumption became that KG-200 had been operating successfully for months before Allied intelligence even recognized the threat. Countermeasures began immediately. In November 1944, all Allied airfields in Europe received orders implementing new security protocols. Aircraft awaiting maintenance required guards posted within visual range at all times. Fuel systems on grounded aircraft were drained or secured with locked caps. Radio codes were changed daily rather than weekly. Most significantly, any unusual aircraft movement, particularly during night hours, now required verification from multiple sources before being cleared. The protocols created enormous logistical burdens. Thousands of additional military police were assigned to airfield security. Round-the-clock guard rotations strained manpower already stretched thin. Maintenance operations slowed as mechanics waited for security clearances to access aircraft. Allied intelligence also launched active investigation into KG-200's structure and capabilities. The captured members of failed theft attempts proved invaluable. Under interrogation and facing execution as spies rather than treatment as prisoners of war, several operatives provided details about KG-200's organization, training methods, and base locations. This intelligence led to targeted bombing raids on suspected KG-200 facilities. In December 1944, American bombers struck a Luftwaffe base near Frankfurt, identified as a major KG-200 operating location. Reconnaissance photos taken after the raid showed destroyed hangars and burned aircraft, including what appeared to be Allied bombers. The damage significantly reduced KG-200's operational capacity. British intelligence, working through the double-cross system of turned German agents, also attempted to feed false information to KG-200. Fabricated airfield security reports suggested certain bases had weak defenses, hoping to lure KG-200 teams into traps. Whether these deception operations succeeded remains unclear from available records. The Allied response extended to broader information security. Intelligence officers reviewed captured German reconnaissance photos and were shocked to discover images of Allied installations that could only have been taken from inside Allied airspace. This revelation led to new protocols for identifying friendly aircraft. Recognition signals became more complex. Radio challenges required specific responses that changed hourly. Fighter pilots received orders to visually inspect any Allied aircraft displaying unusual behavior, even if it bore proper markings. By early 1945, as Germany's overall military situation deteriorated, KG-200's operations became increasingly difficult. The shrinking area of German-controlled territory meant longer flights over enemy airspace, fuel shortages, limited training and operations. Most critically, the Allies had closed the security gaps that made theft operations possible. The last confirmed KG-200 theft attempt occurred in February 1945 and failed catastrophically when security personnel, alerted by new protocols, captured the entire team before they reached their target aircraft. By March 1945, with Allied forces advancing into Germany itself, KG-200 largely abandoned theft operations in favor of more conventional and desperate missions. The Allied response, while ultimately effective, came far too late to prevent KG-200 from executing dozens of successful operations throughout late 1944. The unit had proven that audacity, skill, and careful planning could overcome even sophisticated security measures, and that the enemy's own aircraft could become weapons against them. KG-200 ceased meaningful operations in April 1945 as Nazi Germany collapsed. The unit's final weeks remain obscured by the chaos of war's end. Documents were destroyed, personnel scattered, and facilities were overrun by advancing Allied armies. Many KG-200 pilots and operatives simply removed their uniforms, destroyed their identification papers, and disappeared into the flood of refugees and displaced persons filling Germany's roads. Some were captured. The interrogations of former KG-200 personnel by Allied intelligence in 1945 and 1946 provided the foundation for most historical knowledge about the unit. Pilots like Hauptmann Walter Schreiber and Oberleutnant Hans-Joachim Reschke gave detailed accounts of their operations, perhaps recognizing that cooperation might spare them from execution as spies. Others took their secrets to the grave. The ultimate strategic impact of KG-200's aircraft theft operations remains debatable among military historians. The unit successfully stole and operated perhaps 24 Allied aircraft over approximately 18 months. They gathered valuable intelligence, delivered agents behind enemy lines, and forced the Allies to divert significant resources to enhanced security measures. These were not trivial achievements, yet they could not alter Germany's inevitable defeat. By late 1944, when KG-200 reached peak operational capability, Germany had already lost the war. No amount of intelligence gathered from stolen bombers could reverse the massive material advantage the Allies enjoyed. The hundreds of bombers KG-200 studied and flew meant nothing against the thousands destroying German industry daily. However, KG-200's technical legacy proved more substantial. German engineers who examined captured Allied aircraft gained insights that influenced post-war aviation development. The interrogation of KG-200 personnel provided the Allies with detailed understanding of German intelligence methods and capabilities. Several former KG-200 pilots found post-war careers in aviation, bringing their unique expertise to civilian and military aviation programs. The unit's operations also influenced military doctrine and security planning. The recognition that special operations forces could infiltrate supposedly secure facilities and steal high-value equipment led to comprehensive changes in military-based security procedures that remain in effect today. The concept of insider threat, operators who could blend into normal activities while executing hostile missions, became a permanent consideration in military security planning. Perhaps most significantly, KG-200 demonstrated that even in industrial-scale modern warfare, small groups of highly trained specialists could achieve results far beyond their numbers. This principle, that quality, skill, and audacity, could multiply force effectiveness, shaped the development of post-war special operations forces in multiple nations. The unit also represented one of history's most unusual military formations: combat aviators who fought not primarily through direct engagement, but through deception, infiltration, and exploitation of enemy assumptions. They were intelligence operatives who happened to be pilots, or perhaps pilots who happened to be spies. This blurring of traditional military categories created a model that influenced later special operations aviation units. From a purely aviation history perspective, KG-200's operations demonstrated the remarkable versatility and durability of World War II bomber aircraft. The fact that heavily damaged B-17s and B-24s could be field repaired and flown by pilots with limited type-specific training testified to the fundamental soundness of their design. Some captured Allied aircraft flew dozens of missions for KG-200, proving as reliable for their German operators as they had been for their original American crews. The story of KG-200's aircraft theft operations remains largely unknown outside specialist military history circles, remarkable given their audacity and drama. Several factors explain this obscurity. The unit's extreme secrecy during the war meant few records survived Germany's collapse. Allied intelligence, while aware of KG-200 by late 1944, had limited understanding of the unit's full scope of operations. Many successful thefts were never recognized as such, attributed instead to navigation errors, defections, or simple administrative confusion in the chaos of wartime logistics. Post-war, neither side had particular incentive to publicize the story. For the Germans, KG-200 represented another failed attempt to stave off inevitable defeat, hardly material for national memory. For the Allies, acknowledging that German operatives had successfully infiltrated supposedly secure facilities and stolen military aircraft, proved embarrassing. Better to let the matter fade quietly from official histories. Yet the story endures in aviation history as testament to human skill, courage, and ingenuity under extreme pressure. The pilots who flew stolen bombers through enemy airspace, knowing they faced execution if captured, knowing their own flak batteries might shoot them down, displayed remarkable nerve. The mechanics who field repaired crashed aircraft using salvaged parts and improvised solutions demonstrated technical brilliance. Even the guards and security personnel, who eventually stopped KG-200 operations, showed admirable adaptation to an unprecedented threat. The operations also illuminate a curious paradox of technological warfare. The very sophistication and standardization that made Allied air operations so effective, the thousands of similar aircraft, the routine procedures, the predictable patterns, created vulnerabilities that determined enemies could exploit. Success bred assumptions, and assumptions created opportunities. KG-200 understood this and built entire operations around turning Allied strengths into weaknesses. What remains most striking is the sheer audacity of the concept. In an era of industrial-scale warfare, with millions of men in uniform, thousands of tanks and aircraft, a small unit decided that walking onto enemy airfields and stealing 4-engine bombers was not just possible, but practical. And they were right. For approximately 18 months, they made it work. The stolen bombers themselves, Liberty Bell and Patches, and the dozens of others, represent physical proof that in warfare, as in life, nothing can be taken for granted. Security depends not just on fences and guards, but on maintaining constant awareness that determined adversaries will probe for weaknesses, exploit assumptions, and attempt the seemingly impossible. Today, preserved in archives across Europe and America, scattered documents and photographs hint at the full scope of KG-200's operations. Intelligence reports, interrogation transcripts, maintenance logs for aircraft that mysteriously changed hands, reconnaissance photos showing Allied bombers at Luftwaffe bases. Together, they paint a picture of warfare's stranger dimensions, where the line between friend and enemy could blur in the darkness over occupied Europe. The story deserves to be better known, not to glorify the participants, but to understand them, to recognize that even in humanity's darkest chapters, individuals displayed remarkable skill and determination in service of causes both noble and terrible. The pilots of KG-200 were not heroes in any conventional sense. They served an evil regime in a war of aggression. Yet their achievements in the narrow technical realm of aviation and special operations remain genuinely extraordinary. In the end, they proved that sometimes the most effective weapon is not the largest bomb or the fastest fighter, but a borrowed uniform, a forged document, and the confidence to walk directly through the front gate toward a prize the enemy never imagined anyone would dare to steal.